Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great pleasure to be able to join you online for this sustainability conference. I think it's a really cool concept and I'm glad to be able to contribute. So yeah, my name is Finnur and I will be speaking about the power of wetlands, particularly in the Icelandic context. So just a little bit about myself. Let's see. So yeah, who am I? I feel like the picture on the right, which a friend of mine took a year ago, embodies pretty much my entire personality. I love biking and being active. I love protesting in the streets, and I sometimes wear suits to go to fancy events. So I have a few different hats, and I feel like this picture captures most of them. So you mentioned that I'm on the board of the Icelandic Young Environmentalist Association, and I'm also the Icelandic UN Youth Delegate on climate change. So as such, I got to attend the UN climate change conferences in the past 2 years. And the reason why I'm online with you today is because I'm studying at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands, doing a program called Global Sustainability Science, which I'm about to complete in the coming months. And I also work part-time at the Soil Conservation Service of Iceland, which is going to be an important part of this presentation. So today, in the next 20 minutes, I want to cover firstly the importance of wetlands. Why should we care about wetlands? Secondly, the Icelandic case study, which I researched this past summer, and then make some links to the broader sustainability challenges. Make some links from the Icelandic case study to broader sustainability challenges. But firstly, what is the importance of wetlands? Why should we care about this particular ecosystem? To me, this photo is a random photo I found on the internet of wetlands, and this photo alone answers this question of why we should care about wetlands. Wetlands are a complex, amazing, beautiful, important ecosystem that in itself should exist because of how beautiful it is. That's at least my opinion. But to go into a bit more of the details and different importances. So wetlands serve a global importance in several ways. So despite only covering 6% of Earth's surface, wetlands are home to or provide the breeding grounds for about 40% of all plants and animal species on Earth. So you can imagine the density of biodiversity, the plant and animal diversity on this small 6% of the Earth's surface. And you can imagine why that is important then, to have these ecosystems intact. Secondly, wetlands play an important part in nutrient recycling. So they preserve important nutrients such as carbon and nitrogen, which help in making wetlands a fertile habitat. In addition, they store 30% of the world's soil organic carbon. So again, if we look back to the 6% the wetlands cover of the Earth's surface, and they store 30% of the world's organic carbon, then that again shows the importance of this particular ecosystem. Then for us humans, we often talk about ecosystem services. So what does nature, of which we are a part, but what do other parts of nature have for us? What do they do for us? So wetlands, they provide a fertile soil for us to grow our food in. They help in water recycling, so we have fresh water to drink. They temper floods, which may otherwise damage our towns and cities. They are a source of food for many communities around the world. And they also play an important recreational and spiritual role in many people's lives. And lastly, linked to these ecosystem services, because wetlands have so much to offer for us, it's estimated that 1 billion people in the world depend on wetlands directly for their livelihoods. So that's mostly through the services that ecosystems provide in terms of fertile soil for farming and as a source of food. When it comes to the local importance of wetlands in Iceland, biodiversity is a big one. So 90% of the Icelandic bird population, other than marine birds, rely on wetlands either for their food or as a habitat. So 90% was a pretty shocking statistic to me when I started researching this initially. Secondly, as most people know, tourism is one of the main and biggest industries in Iceland. And wetlands are a beautiful ecosystem that contribute to the uniqueness of the Icelandic landscape, which then attracts tourists. So wetlands can be said to play an important part in our tourism industry. And thirdly, wetlands have historically and continue to to form nutrient-rich fertile soils, in which the Icelandic agricultural sector has depended on and continues to depend on. But despite this importance, there are several threats that face wetlands in the world and in Iceland, and they can be split into two categories, so direct human impact and indirect human impact. When it comes to direct impact, examples of this are construction of buildings. So if we want to have a stable foundation for buildings, we have to drain the water out of the soil, which then disturbs the wetlands. And the same goes for the construction of roads. And then energy infrastructure that we build. So think of, for example, hydroelectric dams, where we have to submerge large areas of land, of which there could be wetlands and have been wetlands in the past. And they are then submerged and destroyed. When it comes to the indirect human impacts that we pose, or the threats that indirectly humans pose to wetlands, we can think about climate change. So climate change puts stress on wetlands around the world in different ways. Whether it be drought or changes in precipitation otherwise, or other impact of climate change. Also biodiversity loss. So because ecosystems are, because wetlands are complex ecosystems, our contribution to biodiversity loss can impact one species or two or three or several species that live in wetlands. And then of course, because these few species are a part of a more complex web of species in wetlands, they can have lasting impacts and detrimental impacts to the rest of the species, leading to the potential collapse of wetland ecosystems. And then thirdly, the third indirect human impact that I'm listing here, of course there are many more, is pollution from industry, which I probably don't have to explain. So in more concrete terms, the impacts that humans have had on wetlands are incredible. So in the past 300 years, 87% of the world's wetlands have been lost. So that means that only 13% of the wetlands that were once known to humans are existent now. And then in Iceland, 47% of our wetlands have been degraded. And this is mostly due to the fact that in between the 1950s and the 1980s, the Icelandic government subsidized the digging of ditches to drain land for agricultural purposes. And this amounted to about 33,000 kilometers of ditches being dug in Iceland in those 3 to 4 decades last century. And for comparison, the circumference of the Earth is about 40,000 kilometers. So the length of ditches in Iceland in wetlands is almost 3/4 the way around the Earth. So now that we've covered the importance of wetlands, both globally and in Iceland, I want to take you through the case study that I conducted last summer. So I've been very active and interested in climate change for quite some years now. And once I started looking at Iceland's greenhouse gas emissions, I found a pretty striking figure. So here we see Iceland's greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 by sector. And we can see there's industry has a really big carbon footprint. Same goes with transport, fisheries, and agriculture. Then we have waste, which is a bit less, and geothermal power plants also. But then there's this big chunk of the circle of the pie chart on the left, and that's land use, which accounts for 67% of Iceland's annual greenhouse gas emissions. This is massive. And most of these emissions come from degraded wetlands or drained wetlands. And so when I found out about this statistic, so when I figured out that degraded wetlands were contributing to more than half and almost 2/3 of Iceland's greenhouse gas emissions, I was wondering to myself, why aren't we doing more to restore these wetlands? It seems so easy to just fill in the ditches that we've dug and bring back the water level, which then reduces the emissions. And it's so, yeah, of course, with climate change and biodiversity loss, we know that it's a very important thing to do to decrease emissions and restore ecosystems. So I was confused as to why the government and other powerful actors weren't doing more. And at this point, I contacted Landgræðslan, or the Soil Conservation Service of Iceland, who oversee on the behalf of the Icelandic government the protection and restoration of wetlands. And I told them, I have this question and I want to get an answer to this question. can I do research with you to figure out, you know, why aren't we making more progress on this topic? And they liked my idea, and they hired me for 2 months last summer to conduct this research to try to answer this question. So we altered the question to being, what are the challenges and opportunities to increasing wetland restoration in Iceland? And the process was a 4-step process. So first, I reviewed existing literature on this topic of wetlands in Iceland, both the degradation, so the subsidies in last century, but also the research that had been done on ways to restore. Then I did an analysis of relevant laws and regulations to figure out, are there any legal barriers that might be the bottleneck? And then the biggest chunk was step 3, or the most important in terms of data collection was step 3, where I conducted semi-structured interviews with 8 stakeholders, all connected with the agricultural sector. And the reason why I chose to do interviews with stakeholders linked to the agricultural sector was because after reviewing the literature, the existing literature, and speaking with people at the Soil Conservation Service, I found out that there wasn't much data, or there hadn't been done much research on the views of stakeholders in the agricultural sector. And because farmers and other people linked to the agricultural sector are such a key stakeholder when it comes to wetland restoration, it became pretty obvious to me that this is the primary data that I felt was important to collect to answer my question. And then after many hours and days and weeks of analysis of the interviews and the literature, I finally wrote a report to communicate the findings. And this report is now available on the website of the Soil Conservation Service for those interested. But what are the findings? So to my demise, or it was pretty disappointing to find that there were 17 challenges, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I found 17 concrete challenges, and they're all interlinked in different ways. But I also found 11 opportunities that could come along with increased wetland restoration. And based on these 17 challenges and 11 opportunities, I formulated 10 suggestions to policymakers and other actors who are linked with wetlands and wetland restoration that I thought would provide sort of like a roadmap or help increase the progress and bring as much positive benefits for all people involved, or all actors involved. So I won't go through each challenge one by one because there's way too many of them, and some of them are less important than others. But the 3 main ones are, well, the first main one that I found was that there's a lack of financial incentives. So if you imagine farmers in Iceland, it's pretty widespread knowledge that their income isn't very high, not very stable, and farming usually takes a lot of time. So if farmers and landowners don't get financially compensated to restore wetlands on their land, it's pretty easy to assume that of course they won't do it. So this is one of the main barriers that I found, and this is also what the people that I talked with told me, is that there isn't a financial incentive, so they either don't feel motivated by it, or they simply can't because their financial status doesn't allow for it. The second, or another one of the main challenges, is that the discourse in Iceland currently on wetlands and wetland restoration is rather negative and uninformed, in the sense that there's a pretty there's been an increasing polarization between 2 poles, so pro wetland restoration and against wetland restoration in the previous few years to a decade, where there's been a lot of blaming between poles rather than constructive dialogue. And there are many complex dynamics underlying why the discourse is so negative and uninformed, and several different media platforms involved and actors and etc. But this leads to the fact that the people who hold the power in terms of restoring wetlands, so the landowners, because the landowners are the ones who own the land and have the power to say, yes, I want to restore wetlands, or no, I don't, is that this polarized discourse seems to them like there isn't a consensus, like they can't believe what people say about the importance of wetland restoration, and therefore we don't make any progress on it. Thirdly, there seems to be a hyper focus on climate. So what I mean by this is that the science that underpins the climate benefits of wetland restoration are quite contested, and not in a scientific sense, but in the discourse sense. So it's pretty agreed upon that restoring wetlands decreases the greenhouse gas emissions from degraded wetlands, but the disagreement seems to be mainly on to what extent and under which conditions. But this isn't an important debate when it comes to being sure of the fact that there are benefits for the climate. But the problem with this hyper-focus on climate in the discourse is that the people who are pro or want to increase wetland restoration keep focusing on the climate benefits, while this is the most contested benefit of many that come along with wetland restoration, rather than focusing on all the other benefits that are less contested. When it comes to the opportunities, contrary to what I expected, people's views on wetland restoration are generally positive. And this, I like to phrase this, that many are not opposed to the idea in theory, because often they think that it's not a negative thing to do. So wetland restoration isn't a negative thing to do in theory, but they might not want to do it on their land specifically. But this is still something I think that's important to take advantage of, the fact that there isn't widespread opposition generally about the concept of wetland restoration. Secondly, there are diverse side benefits, and of course these have been known. So there's benefits for the climate, for biodiversity, for nutrient retention, which is important for farmers. So think of if a farmer wants to make sure that their children have fertile soils to do farming on in the future, it's actually to their benefit to restore the wetlands that they're not using currently, to make sure that the nutrients are retained and that they can then potentially be used for future generations to produce food. And of course, it can increase or improve tourism. And there are many other side benefits. And making people aware of these side benefits increasingly is a big opportunity. And thirdly, the empowerment of farmers is a big opportunity, in the sense that encouraging and supporting farmers to restore wetlands on their own terms gives them more agency to take further environmental action. So currently, farmers feel like they're not really involved in the dialogue. They might not be heard by those who are making the decisions. So if we provide them with the correct information and allow them to make judgment based on what is in their interest, and support them rather than force them to restore wetlands, they might be more likely to first of all, restore the wetlands that are on their land, but also take further action in terms of using less fertilizer or other such environmental actions that are linked with agriculture, but not necessarily connected to wetland restoration. So 3 of the main suggestions that I made according to these challenges and opportunities are, first of all, linked to the first challenge that I mentioned, to simply create a financial incentive. So we know that the farmers many farmers have said that they would respond to a financial incentive. They would be more likely to restore wetlands if they were financially compensated to do so. So that's the first reason why I put forth this suggestion. But also in terms of, if we think historically, the reason why wetlands were degraded in the first place to such a large extent in Iceland is due to the subsidies of the government. So we know that landowners have responded to financial incentives before, which means that they're pretty likely to do so again. My second suggestion was to increase education and information accessibility to farmers and local government representatives about the importance and associated benefits of wetland restoration for them. So not in the broader picture, but to really demonstrate to farmers and landowners and local representatives what's in it for them. Why is it important for wetlands to restore wetlands for them? Because if an individual is aware of the benefit for them personally, they're much more likely to do something because they know it's beneficial for themselves. So this is something that I think is really important, and through my research I found that farmers and local government representatives generally aren't very aware of the benefits that they could reap from wetland restoration. So simply making the crucial actors more aware of the benefits that they could get from wetland restoration is really important. And lastly, may seem like an obvious one, but I think it's something that people really need to hear more, and is to take a more positive or solution-based approach to the wetland restoration discourse. So simply, I wrote in the suggestion that I encourage everyone to take a solution-based approach to wetland restoration through honest and constructive dialogue. So instead of always accusing the other pole of saying something wrong or other things, to really have an open, honest, constructive dialogue where people who may disagree in some ways try to meet in the middle or discuss why they disagree and what solutions they could find to move forwards in a way that benefits everyone, as well as the environment, of course. Now, to link this lastly to the wider picture, or how we can learn from this particular case of wetland restoration in Iceland to solving sustainability challenges of other nature or other places in the world. Even though there are many lessons to be drawn, I'll only cover 3 here. So the first one is the importance of empathy in solving sustainability challenges. Because in a lot of cases, in my opinion, if we were to be more empathetic to other people who are being impacted by climate change, for example, if we were really thinking about how they were feeling, what their situation is, we would be more likely to take the required action to reduce their suffering. So understanding other people's values, priorities, and ways of looking at the world is, in my eyes, really important. Secondly, approaching sustainability issues with a systems thinking cap. So recognizing the complex and unpredictable behavior of interconnected variables is important. And that, yeah, pretty much says everything that needs to be said. And lastly, what I talked about when it comes to the benefits of wetland restoration, having a positive framing. So shifting the discourse from talking about the negatives, about the fact that a certain climate action might be expensive, and rather talk about the benefits that society will get from taking such actions. Because that we will demonstrate to more people that taking climate action is actually in their benefit, and that way we'll mobilize more people and build more momentum. So yeah, that concludes my presentation today. I hope you enjoyed, that you've learned something, and now I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, Finnur, thanks. It was